Hi, I'm Nick, Owens, not Cage, and for the month of April I watched 30 Nicolas Cage movies. I love Nicolas Cage, he's one of my favourite actors. Before starting this challenge I'd already seen somewhere between 30 and 40 of his films, and so this year I decided that I would participate in a challenge called CAGEpril. CAGEpril, started by Brock Baker, literally just involves watching 30 Nicolas Cage movies in the month of April. Usually one per day, but you know, if you miss one, you can watch 2 the next day, which is basically what I did because I missed a few days. But I still managed to get to 30 by the 30th, which was pretty cool. Here's a list of all the movies I've watched before doing this challenge. So, you know, I kind of know my stuff. I mainly did this challenge as a way of getting to know Nicolas Cage as an actor a little bit more. Because, you know, most people really only think of him as the meme guy, you know? They don't really think of him as the extremely talented and multifaceted actor that he really is. I tried to vary between films of varying qualities. Good films and bad films, art films and genre films, high budget films and low budget films. I went all over the spectrum with this, and I specifically set out to watch movies that I hadn't seen. And I had a lot of fun with this. Now there's 2 ways I could go about this. I could talk about them in the order that I watched them, or I could talk about them in the order that they came out. You can already look at the order of which I watched these on my Letterboxd account, so there's no point in doing that in this video when I could do it in the more interesting way, which was putting them in the context of his career, in the order that they came out. So that's what I'm going to do. If you want to look at the order of which I watched them, check out my Letterboxd page in the link in the description below. Do you like my shirt? I think it's pretty fun. It arrived only a few days ago, despite me ordering it like a month and a half ago. That's why it's actually taken me this long to make this video, despite finishing watching all these films in April. So without further ado, we begin with Valley Girl, 1983. This was Nicolas Cage's first leading role in a film. To be perfectly honest, I thought it was a pretty generic high school rom-com. I didn't find it particularly interesting, so I don't really have that much to talk about with it, other than the fact that Nicolas Cage is extremely goofy. So next off, we have Rumblefish, the first film that he did with his uncle, Francis Ford Coppola. This movie was shot back-to-back in conjunction with the film The Outsiders. The Outsiders is a kind of more mainstream Hollywood film, while Rumblefish is the black and white art house brother to that film. Nicolas Cage doesn't really appear in it that much. He's in maybe 3 or 4 scenes. It's a very small supporting role, but despite how small the role is, he's in it, so it still counts. It's really cool, actually, to see his kind of humble beginnings. He was about maybe 19 when the movie was being made. It's a really surprisingly tender film about gang violence and brotherly rivalry, which mainly goes between the main character played by Matt Dillon and his brother played by Mickey Rourke, who I didn't even recognize. It's a really touching story of the impact on someone's life when they remain in the shadow of someone older than them. Next up, from 1986, we have Peggy Sue Got Married, also directed by Francis Ford Coppola. This one is really interesting because I did not know Francis Ford Coppola could do comedy. And what a madman he was for putting Nicolas Cage and Jim Carrey in the same movie. Just completely wild. It's this really fun, like, time travel high school rom-com that actually plays on the fact that it is high school. It's almost as if Francis Ford Coppola saw the 80s high school rom-com genre and decided, you know what? I can do that better. Nicolas Cage has this really strange voice in this movie. He has this high-pitched, like, hey, it's me, I'm Nicolas Cage.
Oh, God.
Off-putting at first, and then extremely endearing as the film progresses. And it was because of that film that Nicolas Cage got cast in the next one, 1987's Moonstruck, directed by Norman Jewison. Cher loved the performance from Peggy Sue Got Married. She said it was like watching a car crash, and decided that was the reason she would get Nicolas Cage involved in this next movie. He has such a big performance in this film to match Cher's big hair. And it's hard really to talk about this film in a way that people haven't already talked about it. He plays this kind of character that you would not expect to be the romantic interest in this kind of movie. He's the brother of the main character's fiancée, which already gives him this kind of animosity towards her, but that animosity is exacerbated by the fact that he lost his fiancée. So he kind of hates the idea of marriage now, because he lost his wife through losing his hand. So Nicolas Cage wears like a prosthetic hand the whole time. And he has that whole like monologue in his first scene of the film about it. I lost my hand! I lost my bride! And it's like really powerful stuff, man. But as the film progresses, he is like molded into the more kind of traditional romantic lead, but like it doesn't feel forced. It feels pretty natural the way he progresses into this character. The chemistry he has with Cher is like beautiful. The rest of the movie is really about infidelity, and it's a surprisingly like charming and hopeful movie about infidelity and adultery. It's hard to kind of describe how it does that. Buckley, get away from my green screen. Alright, next up in 1988 we have Vampire's Kiss. Now this is prime Cage meme material. This is where a lot of those Nick Cage meme scenes come from. Just so many like crazy choices and faces. The man eats a live cockroach. Just on screen, that happens for literally no reason other than to show you that his character is insane. There's not really a moral. It's just about a man going crazy. It's like if American Psycho was about a dude who thought he was a vampire. And it was sillier. Genuinely like a really good satire on like the high class people, you know, like the Wolf of Wall Street kind of guys, you know, those executives in the suits who think they're better than everyone. It's a really fucking weird movie, but honestly there's some really good filmmaking in here, so I actually quite enjoyed it, despite it having that meme status it has, you know. Next up, we have David Lynch's Wild at Heart from 1990. This movie's been on my watch list for ages, because it's a David Lynch movie and because it's a Nicolas Cage movie. Like, these two working together is just a dream come true from a fan of both of them. It's so good. It's perfectly, like, their brainwaves are just in sync during this movie. They work perfectly together, and his on-screen chemistry with Laura Dern is so good. They are such a believable couple despite their characters coming from such a different background. It is a beautifully like all over the place kind of love story, and it is such a love story, you know, like these two characters are so in love with each other. I love those kinds of love stories. I hate the kind of love stories where it's just like a one-sided romance, or they secretly hate each other or whatever. These two characters just completely adore each other, and they're not going to let the world that doesn't want them to be together stop them from being together. And it even has like one of the many times when Nicolas Cage would be working with Willem Dafoe. And Willem Dafoe is like just such a psycho in this movie. Like, everyone looks like they're having so much fun, and it is such a fun movie to watch as well. I can't wait to watch it again. Next up, from 1993, we have Amos and Andrew. To be perfectly honest, I only picked this movie because it was on Amazon Prime, and it was short. I had no idea what it was gonna really be going into it. But it was a pretty solid buddy comedy starring Nicolas Cage and Samuel L. Jackson. Surprisingly, the only time that I know of that these two actors were on screen together. Samuel L. Jackson plays a successful writer, while Nicolas Cage plays a criminal. And they become friends due to the fact that Samuel L. Jackson's character is mistaken for being a criminal because of his skin color. For a movie from 1993, the race politics have actually aged particularly well, especially in how it handles the misunderstandings between police and the people that they persecute. But also, unfortunately, the filmmaking has aged like milk. It is extremely 90s, in some of the worst ways. Just the way that it's made is extremely generic. The music, the way that it's shot, the way that a lot of the characters react to things. It's sadly a bit of a mixed bag in terms of that. But I do miss the days when just random little comedies like this had a song made for it, for the end credits. Like, this is not a movie anyone's ever heard of, and yet it had a song made for it by a pop star. Next up, we have Guarding Tess from 1994. I watched it because they reference it in the new film unbearable weight of massive talent. I'd never heard of this movie until now, so I really didn't have many expectations. It starts off pretty good. It is a really fun dynamic between Nicolas Cage's Secret Service agent character and the old former First Lady that he is tasked with protecting. The dynamic between these two characters is really fun because obviously they both hate each other, but they both actually like each other at the same time. He hates working for her because he thinks he has better potential than working for this random old lady. And she likes him because he defies her and because he's a good bodyguard. And their dynamic is really fun together, but unfortunately the movie really takes a turn when she gets kidnapped and it becomes more of a drama than a comedy. And I hate it when comedies do that. So many American comedies just become a drama halfway through for no reason, and it really dampens it a lot of the time for me. So yeah, that one bit of a meh. Next up, a big one. Leaving Las Vegas. I deliberately bought this on DVD for this challenge. This was the movie I watched last. I deliberately watched it last because this was the movie that won Nicolas Cage his first and currently only Academy Award. I don't really give a shit about the Oscars, but Nicolas Cage deserves way more than just one because he absolutely carries this film. He got into such a dark character, it's such a dark place, playing this alcoholic screenwriter who decides to go to Vegas to basically drink himself to death. He meets up with a prostitute who he then falls in love with and goes on a deeper alcoholic spiral as the film progresses. And he's so weirdly charming despite being such a horrible person. And that is just like a testament to Nicolas Cage's screen presence, that he's able to make this self-destructive spiral so watchable for it. Because I'm not really a big fan of depressing films, but this one this hit that sweet spot for me for being depressing but watchable at the same time. And the aesthetic of nighttime Vegas in the 90s is pretty nice. It's way better than nighttime Vegas when I was there. Next up, from 1999, we have Joel Schumacher's 8mm. This movie owes a lot to Seven. It's basically a Seven-esque dark, sleazy mystery film with an added snuff film plotline. The villain of this film is nothing really to write home about. The most interesting parts are just Nicolas Cage solving the mystery about the snuff film that he has. And it is in those parts of the film that it shines. The rest of it kind of not necessarily falls apart, but just doesn't really add up to the same level of craft as those just brilliantly tense scenes of Nicolas Cage just solving a mystery. It's a bit like the movie Sinister, but with all the horror bits taken out, and a bit more like the movie Seven. But Nick Cage delivers a really increasingly mournful performance as the film goes on. Next up, from the year 2000s, we have Gone 60 Seconds. This movie is basically a proto Fast and Furious thing. It has literally like all of the tropes and story beats as your typical Fast and Furious film, or at least the Fast and Furious films from the 2000s. It literally even ends with a barbecue. It is a cheesy late 90s, car racing action movie. And I loved it, honestly, especially because I watched it with my dad. It was just like a really fun time. I got exactly what I hoped for, but also a bit more. Like the car chase scenes in this movie are genuinely like some of the best in Hollywood action cinema, especially just that last incredible climactic, like almost 20-minute car chase. It's just like astoundingly clear and so over the top. Really fun shit. Next up, also from 2000, we have Brett Ratner's The Family Man. It's a bit like Peggy Sue Got Married, but Nicolas Cage is the main character in this one. It's like a modern-day Christmas Carol where a guy looks back at an alternate life he could have had. It's a what-if kind of movie. These kind of movies can be really interesting, like in Peggy Sue Got Married, but like the best parts of this movie are just the moments when Nicolas Cage is trying to get a hold of this new timeline he's in. And then when he gets used to it and when it becomes like this cheesy romantic drama, it just kind of loses it for me. The best parts of any of these what if movies are always the bits where they're just wondering what the fuck is going on and why the world is all different. And this kind of movie would be nowhere near as watchable as it is if Nick Cage wasn't the lead. I couldn't really imagine anyone else doing this kind of character the same kind of justice as Nick Cage. And Brett Ratner is just such an incredibly generic director, you know? Like, the best parts of all of his movies are the actors in them. Like, the Rush Hour films are only good because of Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. The filmmaking, you could replace it with literally any other director and it would likely turn out to be a better film. Next up, kind of a weird choice. Again, I only picked it because it was on Stan. 2001's Captain Corelli's Mandolin. I don't really know why it's called that. He plays the mandolin in like one scene. It's a very nothing movie to me, to be perfectly honest. It's such a nothing, boring World War II drama. The best parts of it is just the fact that Nicolas Cage does the whole thing in a weird Italian accent.
I'm Captain Antonio Corelli.
Everyone else is trying their best, but Nick Cage just sounds like Mario. Honestly, come to think of it, Nick Cage should have voiced Mario instead of Chris Pratt. Right, next up we have 2003 with Ridley Scott's Matchstick Men. Another director I didn't know could actually do comedy. Ridley Scott is actually surprisingly really good with this one. The story is a bit It's pretty easy to tell where it's going and what the twist is going to be pretty early on, especially when you consider the fact that one of the main characters is supposed to be 14 when she's very clearly a 24-year-old woman. But Nicolas Cage's performance in the film is really fun. He plays this like over-obsessive, phobic, kind of OCD-ridden con artist. And so the con gets flipped over onto him. Like a lot of these meh movies, the best parts are always Nicolas Cage's performance. Quick side rant. He is the saving grace of any bad movie that he's in. Like, you can never discount a bad movie with Nicolas Cage in them because at least the scenes with Nicolas Cage in them will be entertaining. Because he just puts everything into every role he's in. Whether he's in this, like, prestigious art film, a big budget blockbuster, or some crappy direct-to-video schlock, he always just commits to the role and what makes his scenes consistently the best parts of all those films. Next up with 2005, we have Andrew Niccol's Lord of War. Wow! This movie is sharp. This movie is such a smart, stylish, fourth wall breaking satire of the arms race. Think Wolf of Wall Street, but instead of Wall Street, it's an arms dealer for third world countries. It's a great satire, but also a depressing education on the inevitability of war. And Nick Cage's character is just so reprehensible and yet incredibly likable because of the performance. And I'm saying that as like that's on purpose. I'm not just saying I like him because he's Nick Cage. You like him because he's likable, you know? He's charismatic. Sticking to 2005, we have Gore Verbinski's The Weatherman. Gore Verbinski's another director I'm a big fan of. I just love the way his movies are shot. Even in these kind of mid to low budget adult drama comedy things, he still goes so hard on the cinematography as if he was shooting another Pirates of the Caribbean film. It's kind of wacky to hear Michael Caine doing an American accent, pretending to be Nicolas Cage's father. That can get a little bit distracting sometimes, but the film really hits it home, being about a guy trying his best and not really knowing what he's doing with his life, despite being a really successful weatherman. Like, he plays the part of this just depressed guy going about his life pretty well. While all his life is crumbling around him, it is actually kind of nice to see the slow progression that he slowly gets better with the bow and arrow as the film goes on. And I just thought that was a really nice touch that the film had. Next up, 2006, The Wicker Man. What do I need to say? This movie is fucking weird. It's an American remake of a really good British horror film that retains absolutely none of the horror. Apart from maybe the first, like, half of the movie, it's got this, like, kind of eerie vibe to it. But the second half, it just becomes a schlocky B-movie, pun intended, when Nick Cage just goes ham and starts drop-kicking everyone. And because of the version of the film that I happened to watch, I didn't even have the pleasure of seeing the not the bees scene, because that was included in the extended cut. And that's enough about that one. Let's go into Bangkok Dangerous. I'd only heard this film was shit. I only really ever heard of this film in passing along those lists of worst American remakes of foreign films. But honestly, it was a pretty nice movie. It was a very tender kind of film when Nick Cage plays a hitman who has two central relationships in this film. He has a really nice kind of mentor relationship with this local guy who he kind of teaches the trade, and he also has this really actually genuinely touching romance with a deaf cashier. And you can tell that his character is this, like, he's a hitman, but he doesn't really want to be a hitman anymore. And while it takes a little while to get going, it has some genuinely kick-ass action scenes in it. Next up, 2009, we have Knowing, directed by Alex Proyer. Wow. For a PG-13 movie, this was considerably more brutal than I expected. It's an end-of-the-world movie, but some of these set pieces are just completely devastating. Harrowing shit. One of the higher up there, just like big sci-fi disaster movies. Complete with, spoiler alert, a pretty genuinely bittersweet ending. It's one of the few movies of these where the good guys lose. The Earth is like actually destroyed in this movie, but humanity gets to continue in a kind of Garden of Eden set up by aliens. It's worth a watch for the ending alone, honestly. Alright, next up we have one of my favorites from this list. I was consistently entertained by this whole film, with Werner Herzog's Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. Bit of a mouthful of a title, but I loved this thing. Nicolas Cage is just on full manic crazy guy mode the whole time, and Werner Herzog as a director is matching that energy. Absolutely, completely unhinged. So hard to describe. It's full of brilliant moments of absurdity. You gotta watch it. If I have to recommend any film on this list completely, it's Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans, purely because of just how insane, and I may use that word a lot this video, but this film is genuinely insane. But brilliantly insane. Like, there's just so many moments of filmmaking in this that I adore. The breakdancing soul, the lizard camera, the fact that Nicolas Cage's character is just high on crack the entire time, and a brilliant moment that is described perfectly in a Cinefix video from a couple years ago, where all three of the major plot lines just kind of get wrapped up off screen. It's just like no other movie does that. No movie does that, but this movie does that. And that's why I love it. Alright, we're getting into the 2010s now, starting in 2013 with The Frozen Ground. This is another one of those like kind of direct-to-video true crime movies. So we're getting into that kind of direct-to-video territory now with Mr. Cage. Look, Nicolas Cage delivers a really good performance, Vanessa Hudgens also delivers a really good performance, and John Cusack delivers a powerhouse of a performance. So this is like a serial killer movie, where the point is Nicolas Cage's character is hunting down the serial killer and he needs like the evidence and everything. What is the point of showing us that the serial killer is this guy like 30 minutes into the movie? We've got another hour left where we just know who the bad guy is, and a lot of the tension is just kind of gone because we know who he is, so we're not experiencing the mystery alongside Nicolas Cage now. It's less of a what's happening and more of a how is he gonna get this guy thing, because it is based on a true story. So we know that the guy gets caught, and we know by the end of the film at least that he does end up confessing to lots and lots of killings. But for a movie of this kind, it is still at least like genuinely like somber and dark. Like, man, this movie is dark, but it doesn't feel overbearing. Continuing in with the direct-to-videos, you'll notice that the quality of these films gradually decreases for a couple of years until until it picks up again. We have Rage from 2014, also known as Torakev, which I think is a type of gun. Once again, I picked this just because it was on Amazon Prime. There's a lot of really cool shit in this movie, a lot of really inspired camera work, especially a lot of the slow motion, and some of the action scenes are alright. A lot of it just kind of ends up being coverage, put the cameras everywhere, and find it in post bullshit that a lot of these direct-to-video movies have. But One thing I will say, it is hilarious watching actors try and out-crazy Nick Cage. Like, every time an actor's in a yelling match, you just know they're outmatched. Just purely on the fact that they're in a yelling match with Nick Cage. You're never gonna win. No one's ever gonna win in a yelling match against Nick Cage. It's just not possible. So, you know, it's funny. Next up, 2014, Outcast. Honestly, I don't really have anything to say about this thing. It's just kind of a generic medieval fantasy action movie with Hayden Christensen. So Nicolas Cage is one of those actors where he's good in everything. He's able to bring his skills along with him, so that when he works with directors who know what they're doing and directors who don't know what they're doing, he's able to bring his, you know, skills in and work. You know, he is good. Hayden Christensen, on the other hand, is a talented actor when in the command of a talented director. So when he's in a good movie that knows what it wants to be and knows what it's doing with a director who's confident and knows how to use him, Hayden Christensen can deliver a good performance. In a movie like Outcast, yeah, unfortunately Hayden Christensen matches the film's level of boring and uninterestingness, which is hard when he's the main character and Nicolas Cage just kind of fucks off halfway through and then comes back for the last half hour. And yet, you know, despite both of these actors being in such different powerhouses, neither of them know what accent they're doing. Sticking to 2014 with the absolute worst film on the list, Left Behind. I almost felt my soul leave my body while I was watching this. And some people say that in a good way. I say this in a this movie almost killed me kind of way. But I'm glad this movie didn't kill me, because I'm pretty sure by its judgment I would have gone straight to hell for watching it. It's one of the most up its own ass evangelical pieces of religious bullshit. It's a movie about the rapture. And the biblical rapture is a genuinely interesting story. The Bible is full of fantastic stuff, but when it's taken to this level of literal realism, it is extremely lost on any person who isn't religious like myself. And instead becomes just this whiny kind of piece of filmmaking that is just yelling at its audience rather than trying to communicate with them. And you'd think a movie starring Nicolas Cage about a pilot forced to land a plane during a biblical rapture where half of his passengers have disappeared, that sounds like it would be a really cool movie. I love the sound of that. And then I'll watch it, and it's probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And not just because of how condescending it is, but also because it's just dog shit filmmaking. It's horribly edited, horribly directed. Every single person in this film is a horrible actor, except for Nick Cage, who even he, like, and I sung his praises so much in the rest of this video, but even he doesn't look like he's having a good time here. I could go on and on. I can't be fucked, honestly, giving this movie any more contempt. 2016, Dog Eat Dog, directed by Paul Schrader. Paul Schrader's an interesting man. He's made some very strange films. Strange in the way that I like. Hoo boy! Are the characters in this movie horrible people? But hoo boy, are they not just so fun to watch. This is yet another film where Nicolas Cage works with Willem Dafoe. It's a pretty off-the-wall fucking surrealist noir thing that it kind of starts off as your pretty typical, like, tough guy noir movie, but then as it progresses it just gets just way more just off-kilter with some of the strangest editing choices I've ever seen. Just Paul Schrader completely discovering digital filmmaking and just going buck wild with those Adobe Premiere transitions. And this movie, like, left me speechless. Like, it ends with Nicolas Cage doing an impersonation of Humphrey Bogart as he just fucking destroys a group of armed cops that honestly completely outmatched and outnumbered him. It's one of those movies. If you've seen a Paul Schrader movie, you know what I'm talking about. Next up, 2017, we have Brian Taylor's Mum and Dad. Brian Taylor is one half of the Neville Dean Taylor duo. They've worked with Nicolas Cage before with Ghost Rider 2, which, side note, is a pretty fucking nuts comic book movie. Anyway, Mum and Dad functions the same way as a zombie movie does, in that it is about a group of people who go crazy and try to kill another group of people. But instead of zombies, it's parents trying to kill their kids, which is a really interesting idea, executed with the kind of crazy, violent, over-the-top, high adrenaline, wacky way that you would expect of this kind of movie. In terms of violence, doesn't really go as hard as I kind of expected it to go. I was kind of hoping it would be a little more I mean, it's violent, it's very violent, but I was kind of expecting it to be a little more nuts and a little more out there, considering the premise and the main star. But I can't say that it disappointed me, because it kind of gave me everything that I expected, if not just a little less. Like, I got everything I wanted, I was just kind of hoping for a bit more. And also, it's just pretty bold of this movie to just not have an ending. It literally just, like, spoiler alert, literally just, like, cuts off halfway through the last sentence. Alright, first movie of the 2020s. Jiu-Jitsu. I was given this movie as a Secret Santa present. I think half as a joke, and half as a, oh, he likes Nicolas Cage, let's give him a Nicolas Cage movie. Of which he's in... I mean, he's in the movie for a good chunk, but he doesn't really have much to do with what he's given. Spoiler alert, this movie's not very good. It's another one of those direct-to-video kind of things with a surprisingly big budget. This movie cost about $25 million. This movie cost the same amount to make as Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is the best movie of this year so far. It's an absolute mess. Frank Grillo's in this movie. He is direct-to-video royalty. And honestly, he's up there with Nicolas Cage in those actors that just improve all the shit movies that he's in. But even Frank Grillo is not really given much to do in this movie. Like, how do you put Frank Grillo, Nicolas Cage, and Tony Jaa in the same movie and make it just this incoherent mess with admittedly a few really cool fight scenes that were absolutely the cause of the choreographers and not the director. But outside of those few impressive fight scenes, it's full of awful VFX, awful expository dialogue, awful characters, and just awful everything else. Not even Frank Grillo, Nick Cage, or Tony Jaa can save it. I do not recommend watching this movie apart from if any of that sounds interesting to you. I at least had fun watching it with my dad in a kind of pointing, laughing, looking at how bad this movie is kind of way. You know what I mean? Quick message for the person that gave me that Blu-ray. It's your fault. Next up in 2021, we were given the beautiful Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Willy's Wonderland. It's basically just Nicolas Cage versus evil animatronics, alright? Do I need to say anything else? Because even though I'm pretty sure I don't, I'm going to anyway. He doesn't say anything in this movie. He goes the entire 80 minutes without uttering a single word, other than, like, grunts and yelling when he's fighting the animatronics. And it's perfect. Even without uttering a single word, he manages to be simultaneously, like, this monolith of a man, but also hilariously stoic as well. And, like, little side note, it was really funny to see Christian Del Grosso in this film, because I was a fan of his back in the days of Vine. And when I say back in the days, I mean like 2013. You know, he's the kind of person that I was a fan of back then, didn't think about, like never crossed my mind when Vine shut down. And now suddenly I'm watching a Nick Cage movie and he shows up and gets brutally killed by an animatronic. C'est la vie. Next up, also from 2021, we have Michael Sarnowski's Pig. A movie I'm really disappointed I missed out on seeing in theaters. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was given an extra day in theaters, but I watched it on Stan. It's got the kind of plot you'd expect of a John Wick ripoff, but instead it's this really kind of soft-spoken, heartfelt, somber, tragic revenge films. It's about a man who lives in the woods with his truffle hunting pig, The pig gets kidnapped. He goes to this city that he hasn't been in 10 years and goes on this kind of journey trying to find it. And I don't really want to talk about that. I can go on and on about how good this movie is, but I don't really want to. I just kind of want to tell you to go see it. Because it's just a really touching film. And it's one of Nicolas Cage's finest performances. He's just... oh, I can't put into words how good of an actor Nicolas Cage is, you know? Man, just like during this month, he's just made me feel like so many different emotions. And it's no wonder that he believes that this is one of his best films, because I agree, and I think this is definitely one of his best films. It's beautiful. He's such a good actor, man. Which is why I'm just so happy with this absolute love letter to the man that was released earlier this year. Our final film, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. I was lucky enough to go see a press screening of this film because I was writing a review for it for RMITV in Review. You can just tell that this movie was made by someone like me. A guy who just absolutely loves Nicolas Cage and the care and work that he puts into his craft. And my appreciation for Nicolas Cage makes me, I think, appreciate this film even more. It may not get to the same level of crazy as some of the wackier films on this list go, but I didn't really need it to be. It was a sufficient level of wacky that I was happy with. Because this film is best when it is just this fun little bromance between Nicolas Cage's fictional portrayal of himself and Pedro Pascal's character Javi, who is basically just a self-insert for the director and his love of Nicolas Cage. It's an infectious movie because it's just this really fun love letter to the guy, but also just a genuinely entertaining action comedy. And I don't want to say too much. I think it's a really fun movie to watch, especially if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage, without really knowing what's going to happen, because there are some genuinely entertaining twists and turns throughout the film. And if you do want a more kind of in-depth review of the film, check out my full review from RMIT's In Review in the description below. But yeah, that's CAGEpril. Man's made so many movies that I might do this again next year, honestly. But yeah, that's me signing off, talking about my favorite actor, Nick fucking Cage!